Do you think hundreds of millions of people could find themselves on the brink of survival in one of the world's most developed countries? This exact situation unfolded in northern China. Just 20 years ago, each resident here had access to less water than someone living in the Sahara Desert. Beijing was literally dying of thirst. The ground was cracking, wells were drying up, and sandstorms from the Gobi Desert covered the capital every month. Facing such a water shortage, China had a choice: relocate millions of residents, or accomplish an engineering feat and reverse the flow of rivers. Think this sounds impossible? We're about to find out. To understand the scale of this disaster, we need to remember a simple number. Each resident of northern China had access to several times less water than the established minimum for survival. For comparison, some areas had less water than the Sahara Desert. While the north was choking from thirst, the country's south was drowning in water. The massive Yangtze River annually dumped such an enormous amount of fresh water into the ocean that it could have supplied all of Europe. The only problem was, this water wasn't where it was needed most. By the end of the 20th century, the situation became critical. Underground sources around Beijing were completely depleted. Groundwater levels were dropping by 5 meters per year. The city was sinking, asphalt was cracking, buildings were deforming. Wells had to be drilled deeper and deeper. Some went a kilometre into the ground just to extract a little water for the population. In such moments, utopian ideas usually emerge. Back in the mid-20th century, China's leader Mao Zedong spoke a simple phrase: "The South has plenty of water, the North has little, so we need to share." Back then his words seemed like a slogan, but half a century later they became the foundation for the most massive hydraulic engineering project in human history. In the early 2000s, China began implementing this plan. This launched the South to North Water Diversion, an engineering construction project comparable to the Great Pyramids in scale and cost. The project included 3 routes: eastern, central, and western, each stretching thousands of kilometres. Their total length exceeded 4,000 kilometres. The first to launch was the eastern route. It was based on the Grand Canal, built over 1,000 years ago. Once it connected the north and south of the country, and was considered an engineering marvel of its time. But now it needed to be transformed into a modern water highway. The task proved more complex than it appeared on paper. To lift water from the Yangtze and push it north, they had to build more than 20 pumping stations. Each one consumes as much energy as an entire city needs. This was a real pumping front, operating around the clock to move millions of tons of water. The main barrier stood in the way: the Yellow River. To channel water through it, Chinese engineers had to drill an underground tunnel almost 10 meters in diameter. This was an infrastructural experiment that many countries would have considered insane, but in China it worked. In 2013, the eastern route began operating. The first water reached the northern provinces, but joy quickly turned to concern. The water quality was so poor that it couldn't be used without extensive treatment. Along the way, the water collected industrial waste and the system risked becoming a giant sewer. To save the project, they had to shut down hundreds of enterprises, change technologies at thousands of factories, and build modern treatment facilities along the route. This was so expensive that many critics declared the project an economic failure even before its large-scale operation. But the result surprised everyone. The water became cleaner than many local sources. People in the north could drink tap water that met the strictest standards for the first time in decades. The eastern route proved the concept worked. But even it remained just an additional source. The main hopes were tied to the central route. The central route began at the Danjiangkou Reservoir. To turn it into the main reservoir for the country's north, engineers raised the dam to the height of a 5-story building. The price was enormous. Hundreds of villages ended up underwater, and more than 300,000 people had to relocate. This is comparable to the population of a small European country. For millions of Chinese, this became a personal tragedy. People were relocated to new cities, paid compensation, and provided housing. But the lost villages, cultural traditions, and ancestral graveyards were forever submerged. The project's key challenge was making water flow without pumps. Chinese engineers created an artificial river with minimal slope, just a few centimetres per kilometre. This is enough for water to flow naturally, but required incredible precision. One wrong calculation, and the canal becomes either a dry concrete pit or a flood. Builders had to construct dozens of aqueducts, dig tunnels under mountains, and build concrete channels through densely populated areas. One such aqueduct, Shahi, stretched 12 kilometres. Essentially, it's a bridge where a river flows over another river. After several years, the project began producing initial results. By 2025, the central route had delivered more than 70 billion cubic metres of water to the north. Today, 2/3 of Beijing's water comes from there. This water takes more than 2 weeks to reach the capital. Imagine one drop's journey begins in the southern provinces and ends in a Beijing residence tap after 14 days. For the first time in many decades, groundwater levels under the capital began recovering. Everyone felt the changes. Water in the capital became not only cleaner but tastier. Even ordinary tea, which had been part of Chinese culture for centuries, now brewed differently. Teapots had less scale build-up, and people began noticing health improvements due to reduced harmful substances. In Hebei province, more than 5 million people stopped suffering from excess fluoride and salt in their drinking water. Fluorosis, a disease that had disfigured residents' teeth in these regions for decades, became a thing of the past. For millions of families, this symbolised that a national project could truly change an individual person's life. Along with the water, entire ecosystems came back to life. Rivers that were considered long dead reappeared in the north. Lake Baiyangdian, known as the Northern Pearl, filled with water again and became home to birds and fish. Numerous small rivers that had dried up over recent decades got a second life. The economy also felt a powerful boost. Industrial zones that couldn't be built due to water shortages began developing. Chinese factories gained stable access to clean water and could increase production. Hundreds of thousands of new jobs emerged in the northern provinces. Even the real estate market felt the effect. Northern cities that were considered dangerous to live in due to water shortages became attractive places for investment. Housing prices rose, and new Beijing neighbourhoods would have been impossible to imagine just 20 years ago. So what about the western route? It still hasn't been launched. It remains in the planning and preliminary discussion stage. The reason is simple. The route requires construction on the Tibetan Plateau at altitudes up to 5 kilometres, with high seismic activity, permafrost and glaciers. This combination makes both construction and operation extremely risky and expensive. Imagine, tunnels need to be built for hundreds of kilometres through mountain ranges. Work would be conducted in thin air and at low temperatures. Any error in calculating slopes and capacity results in either an empty canal or a breakthrough and washout. An important factor, some specialists warn that such a scheme could become a scenario like what happened with the Aral Sea. In Central Asia during the last century, massive water extraction from the Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers for cotton irrigation disrupted the balance. Inflow to the Aral Sea decreased. The sea split into parts, salinity increased, fishing disappeared, and dust storms carried salts and chemicals across the steppe. The risk logic is the same. If you take water above sustainable inflow levels, the downstream ecosystem degrades, and this can escalate into a global catastrophe. But for northern China's residents, the outcome is already tangible. Stable tap water, groundwater recovery, and reduced risks of serious diseases. These changes became visible signs that the national bet on water transfer works. Interesting question. If such a project were proposed in your country, would the money actually reach the concrete walls and real water in the tap? Write what you think about this in the comments.